What if the most famous family in the world is about to lose control, not because of a scandal, not because of the media, but because of their own son? What if Brooklyn Beckham is holding a story so explosive, so personal, that it could rewrite everything we thought we knew about the Beckham empire? For years, the Beckhams sold us perfection. Smiles, fashion, power, unity. A billion-dollar brand wrapped in flawless family photos. But what if that picture was carefully staged? What if behind those matching outfits and red carpet moments was a rulebook nobody ever saw? And now, what if Brooklyn is ready to break that rulebook? Rumors are spiraling out of control that he's preparing a tell-all book. Not a polite memoir. Not a celebrity diary. A full story. In his own words. No filters. No brand managers. No damage control. And the timing? Suspicious. The silence from David and Victoria? Even louder. The cryptic posts? The distance? The wedding drama? The anxiety confessions? This doesn't look like random family tension anymore. This looks planned. This looks like someone who's done protecting the image and ready to protect the truth. And if that book really drops, the Beckhams won't just be trending. They'll be exposed. And the strangest part? Brooklyn hasn't actually confirmed anything. No official announcement. No publisher reveal. No cover art. Nothing. Yet somehow, the feeling that a book is coming is hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. You can't see the flames, but you can smell something burning. Fans started noticing tiny clues. Small, almost invisible moves. Brooklyn being spotted in places where other celebrities were seen before dropping explosive memoirs. His sudden comfort with speaking openly about anxiety. His growing distance from family events. And most importantly, his silence when asked about reconciliation. That silence speaks louder than any press statement ever could. Because usually, when celebrity kids have disagreements with their parents, they go online. They rant. They post. They vent. Brooklyn isn't doing that. He's calm. Measured. Almost prepared. Like someone who knows their real response isn't going to be on Instagram. It's going to be printed. For decades, the Beckham family operated like a luxury brand. Not just a family. Every appearance coordinated. Every interview polished. Every photo a masterclass in image control. They weren't just celebrities. They were a global symbol of perfection. And symbols don't allow cracks. Which is why Brooklyn's recent tone feels so dangerous to that image. He's not acting like a rebellious son. He's acting like someone who has stepped outside the system and is now looking back at it from a distance. And what he's seeing doesn't look as perfect anymore. In multiple interviews, he's hinted at feeling overwhelmed growing up. Not by fame alone, but by expectation. The need to always represent something bigger than himself. To never slip. Never fail publicly. Never embarrass the brand. Notice the wording he uses. He doesn't say family pressure. He says pressure of the image. That's a very specific choice of words. It suggests that what he was protecting wasn't emotions. It was reputation. People close to the situation claim that behind closed doors, Brooklyn's mistakes were handled not with conversations, but with strategy. Stories were adjusted. Narratives were shaped. Headlines were managed. Not to hurt him, but to maintain the Beckham shine. But to a child growing up inside that machine, protection can start to feel a lot like control. And that's where things start getting uncomfortable. Because if Brooklyn writes about this, he's not accusing his parents of being bad people. He's accusing the system they built of being suffocating. That's a much harder thing to defend. The shift became obvious around the time of his wedding. What should have been the happiest day of his life slowly turned into the most talked-about tension point in the Beckham saga. Reports of awkward moments. Unspoken drama. Emotional strain. And later, Brooklyn himself calling parts of it humiliating. Humiliating is a strong word for a wedding attended by global celebrities. What exactly happened that day? No one knows for sure. And that mystery is exactly what makes it powerful. Because when there's no clear answer, the imagination fills the gap. And imagination is far more dramatic than reality. Then came the crystal ceremony under the full moon. At first, people laughed it off as a trendy, spiritual moment. But when you line it up with the timeline of his distancing from his family, it starts to look less like a vibe, and more like a statement. A ritual about emotional healing. About letting go. About fresh beginnings. That doesn't feel random anymore. It feels symbolic. And symbolism is what makes stories memorable. After that, Brooklyn openly admitted something that changed the tone of everything. He said that distancing himself from his family ended years of anxiety.
Read that again.
Not helped. Not improved.
Ended.
That's the kind of sentence that belongs in a memoir chapter, not a casual interview. Because it raises a question no one is ready to answer.
What was causing the anxiety in the first place?
Meanwhile, David and Victoria remain completely silent.
No interviews. No defensive posts.
No emotional statements. Just perfectly timed appearances.
Fashion shows. Award nights.
Smiling photos with Romeo, Cruz, and Harper. From the outside, it looks like nothing is wrong. But from the inside, it looks like a brand doubling down on perfection while a storm quietly builds. And right at the center of this emotional storm is someone who hasn't said a single word. Harper Beckham. Brooklyn has always been extremely protective of his little sister. And now, people believe his recent words aren't just reflections on his past, they are warnings about her future. Because Harper is stepping into the exact world Brooklyn is stepping away from.
Front rows at fashion shows. Designer outfits. Public praise for her style. Increasing appearances. The gentle introduction into the Beckham spotlight.
To fans, it looks adorable. To Brooklyn, it might look familiar.
Too familiar.
That's why his comments hit differently when you think about her.
He's not just talking about himself anymore. He's talking about the cycle repeating. A brother watching history reload.
And that emotional angle is what makes this rumored book feel less like revenge and more like protection. At the same time, Nicola Peltz stands firmly by his side. Their social media presence is loud, affectionate, unapologetic. Brooklyn doesn't look like someone trapped in drama.
He looks like someone relieved.
Like someone who finally feels free to live without representing a global brand every time he posts a photo. That contrast is impossible to ignore. On one side, the polished Beckham image. On the other, Brooklyn and Nicola's unfiltered independence. And the longer this contrast continues, the louder the unspoken story becomes.
Because the world is starting to realize something. This isn't a loud family feud. This is a quiet narrative shift.
One where a son might be preparing to tell a story that was never meant to be told. And if that story ever makes it to paper, it won't just shake headlines. It will force everyone to look back at decades of Beckham moments and see them through a completely different lens. And just when people thought this was only about old tension and emotional distance, new whispers started surfacing.
Whispers that this isn't just a memoir about feelings. It's a story about how a global image is manufactured.
Because the more you listen to Brooklyn's words, the more a pattern starts to appear.
He doesn't talk like someone hurt by a single incident.
He talks like someone who lived inside a carefully designed system for years. A system where mistakes didn't disappear, they were redirected. A system where awkward moments didn't go public, they were rewritten. A system where reality didn't always match the headlines. And that's where things start getting uncomfortable for the Beckham legacy. Insiders claim that for years, Brooklyn's career detours, photography, cooking, creative projects, were quietly managed behind the scenes. Publicly, it was presented as exploration. Privately, it was allegedly handled as containment. Not because his parents didn't love him, but because the Beckham brand couldn't afford unpredictability. Every family has messy moments. But most families don't have a billion-dollar reputation attached to their last name. And when reputation becomes priority, authenticity can slowly take a back seat. According to sources close to the situation, Brooklyn often felt like he wasn't allowed to fail normally. Every mistake felt magnified. Every awkward phase felt like a PR issue. Every personal decision felt like it needed approval from an invisible rulebook. Imagine growing up knowing that your bad day could become tomorrow's headline. Imagine feeling like you're not just living your life, you're representing a global symbol. That's not pressure. That's performance. And Brooklyn is starting to sound like someone who got tired of performing. This is why fans believe the rumored book won't just talk about emotions. It will talk about mechanisms. About how narratives are shaped. About how stories are spun before they reach the public. Because if he really describes how certain moments were handled behind the scenes, it could change how people interpret old Beckham memories forever. That red carpet smile? Was it genuine or necessary? That family photo? Was it spontaneous or scheduled? That interview? Was it honest or rehearsed? Once doubt enters the picture, perfection starts to look different. And here's where things get even more intense. Some reports suggest that Brooklyn's distancing didn't start recently. It started years ago, quietly, slowly, building up frustration that no one noticed because the outside image never changed. He didn't explode. He withdrew.
He didn't accuse. He observed. He didn't expose. He waited.
That patience is what makes this feel calculated, not emotional. And then there's the money factor. For years, people assumed Brooklyn's lifestyle, projects, and comfort were tied to the Beckham empire. But now, with Nikola Peltz's family wealth and status, Brooklyn is in a completely different position. He's financially independent from the brand that once defined him. That changes everything. Because when financial dependence disappears, so does silence. Suddenly, he doesn't have to protect the system anymore.
He can talk about it.
And that's exactly what insiders say the Beckhams fear most.
Not anger, not rebellion, but honesty.
Meanwhile, David and Victoria's strategy seems crystal clear. They've increased public appearances.
More polished family moments. More fashion events. More award nights. More smiles. It looks like business as usual. But some people see it differently. They see it as reinforcement.
Like the brand is shining brighter on purpose while something darker brews in the background. The message being sent is subtle but powerful. The Beckham image is still perfect. But the louder that message gets, the more people start asking why it needs to be repeated. And once again, Harper's presence becomes impossible to ignore.
She's appearing more, dressing sharper, sitting front row,
becoming part of the visual future of the Beckham legacy.
To the public, it's sweet.
To Brooklyn, it might feel like déjà vu because if he really felt crushed under that spotlight, watching his little sister step into it could be deeply emotional for him. And that's why his words about anxiety feel less like confession and more like warning.
He's not just telling his story. He's hinting at what happens when a child grows up inside a brand before they understand who they are without it.
At the same time, Brooklyn and Nikola's life looks like the opposite of that world.
Their posts are casual.
Their captions playful.
Their presence unfiltered. No perfect staging. No matching outfits. No brand messaging. Just two people living loudly and freely.
And that contrast is screaming a message without saying a word. This is what life looks like outside the Beckham blueprint. Which leads to a question no one can ignore anymore. What exactly was inside that blueprint? Because if Brooklyn really decides to map it out in a book, people won't read it as gossip. They'll read it as revelation. And revelations have a way of sticking around much longer than scandals. That's why this rumored memoir feels bigger than celebrity drama. It feels like a behind-the-scenes tour of how one of the world's most perfect families stayed perfect for decades. And perfection, when examined closely, is never accidental.
It's designed.
It's maintained.
It's protected.
Sometimes at a cost no one sees. Brooklyn might be ready to show what that cost looked like from the inside. And now, the biggest question hanging over all of this isn't if Brooklyn has something to say.
It's when he decides to say it.
Because the longer this silence stretches, the louder it becomes. Every passing week without clarification only adds fuel to the rumor that something massive is being prepared behind the scenes. People have started looking at Brooklyn's recent moves differently. The places he travels. The people he meets. The calm confidence in his interviews. The way he talks about freedom without ever naming what he felt trapped by. It's the behavior of someone who knows their real story hasn't been told yet. And what makes this situation so explosive is timing. Brooklyn isn't a teenager anymore figuring life out in public.
He's older, married, emotionally settled, financially secure.
He's in the exact stage of life where people reflect on their past and decide whether to stay silent or finally speak. And according to whispers surrounding the situation, he's leaning towards speaking. Because a book is different from an interview. An interview can be edited. A post can be deleted. A comment can be misunderstood. But a book? A book is permanent. Ink doesn't apologize. Ink doesn't backtrack. Ink freezes your version of events in history forever. And if Brooklyn puts his version of the Beckham story into print, it won't just trend for a week.
It will sit on shelves. It will be quoted. It will be analyzed.
It will be compared to every old interview, every old photo, every old public moment. Suddenly, people won't be looking at Beckham history the same way. They'll be rereading it.
Through his eyes.
That's what makes this so dangerous for the Beckham empire.
Not because he might insult them, but because he might explain them.
And explanations are much harder to defend against than accusations. Because how do you argue with someone's personal experience?
You can deny events. You can deny rumors.
But you can't deny how someone says they felt growing up. That's why David and Victoria's silence now feels less like patience and more like strategy. They know that the moment they publicly challenge him, they risk pushing him closer to the edge.
Closer to publishing. closer to permanence. So they stay calm. They stay polished. They stay smiling for cameras.
Because maintaining the image might be the only tool they have left.
But images don't talk back.
Books do.
And then there's public appetite.
The world today doesn't crave perfect celebrity families anymore. It craves truth.
Mess. Reality.
People are tired of Instagram perfection. They want to know what happens behind the filters. Which means if Brooklyn's story ever hits shelves, the audience is already waiting.
Not to judge, but to listen. And that's the part that changes everything.
Because Brooklyn knows how public sympathy works. He's lived inside media attention his entire life.
He knows how narratives flip when honesty enters the room.
He knows that a story about anxiety, pressure, and image control will resonate far beyond celebrity gossip.
It becomes relatable, human, real.
And when something feels real, people believe it. That's why this rumored memoir wouldn't just be a scandal.
It would be a cultural moment.
A son explaining what it's like to grow up inside one of the most powerful family brands on earth. And right at the emotional center of this moment still stands Harper.
Too young to be part of the fight.
Too visible to be ignored. She represents the future of the Beckham image. And Brooklyn represents the past that struggled under it. That contrast alone could become the emotional core of his story. A brother who stepped away, watching his sister step in. A cycle he desperately hopes doesn't repeat. Which makes his message feel less like revenge and more like protection.
Less like drama and more like warning.
And that's what makes this entire situation feel so heavy.
Because this isn't loud screaming or public arguments.
This is quiet tension with massive consequences. A family holding its breath.
A son holding his story.
And a world watching, waiting for the moment those two things collide. Because if Brooklyn really decides to tell everything, this won't just be another chapter in celebrity gossip. It will be the chapter that redefines how we remember the Beckhams forever. The perfect family.
The flawless image.
The carefully controlled narrative.
All of it will be questioned. Not by outsiders, but by someone who lived inside it.
And once that happens, there's no going back. Because when the person who helped build the image starts explaining how it was built, the illusion doesn't just crack. It shatters. So now the question isn't whether something is wrong inside the Beckham world. The question is how long it can stay hidden. Because if Brooklyn Beckham really decides to put his story on paper, this won't just be another celebrity headline you scroll past. This will be the moment the world looks back at decades of Beckham history and starts asking brand new questions.
Questions nobody ever thought to ask before.
Was the perfection real or carefully maintained? Was the unity natural or necessary? And most importantly, what did it cost the people living inside it?
Brooklyn might be the first person brave enough to answer that.
And if he does, this won't just shake the Beckham name. It could completely change how we see celebrity families, image control, and the pressure of growing up inside a global spotlight. But what do you think? Do you believe Brooklyn is really preparing a tell-all book? Or is this all a slow, silent message to his family? And is Harper the real reason he might finally speak up? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story is far from over, and every new move Brooklyn makes adds another piece to the puzzle. If you want more deep dives, hidden angles, and the kind of stories no one else is connecting like this, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications.
Because when this story takes its next turn, you'll want to be here first.